The mop moved across the floor in slow, steady strokes, back and forth, back and forth. The same movement Daniel Finch had made 10,000 times before in the 3 years he had worked at the Galactic Military Academy on Prime. The corridor was empty at this hour. Most of the cadets were in their evening classes, learning about fleet tactics or alien diplomacy, or whatever else the Academy deemed important for future officers. Daniel preferred these quiet hours. The silence gave him space to think, or more often, space to not think at all. He was a human man in his late 40s, though he looked older. His hair had gone at the temples and was spreading slowly across his head like frost on a window. Deep lines marked his face, carved by years of something more than simple age. His eyes were brown and unremarkable, the kind of eyes that slid past you without leaving any impression. That was exactly how Daniel wanted it. The Galactic Military Academy was the most famous military school in the known universe. Cadets came from 37 different species to train here. They learned to command starships, lead ground forces, and navigate the complex politics of a galaxy filled with competing powers. The instructors were legends, beings who had fought in wars that shaped the fate of civilizations. The graduates went on to become admirals and generals and planetary governors. Nobody paid attention to the janitors. Daniel dipped his mop in the bucket and wrung out the excess water. The chemical smell of the cleaning solution was familiar to him now, almost comforting. It was a simple smell for a simple job. No complexity, no hidden dangers, no decisions that could cost lives. Just a mop and a floor and the quiet rhythm of work. A group of cadets rounded the corner, their voices loud with the energy of youth. They were a reptilian species that stood over 7 feet tall with scales that shimmered in shades of green and blue. Their powerful bodies were built for combat, and their culture valued strength above almost everything else. Daniel stepped aside, pulling his cleaning cart against the wall to let them pass. The cadets did not acknowledge him. Their golden eyes swept over him without interest, dismissing him as part of the scenery. One of them was telling a story about a training exercise, something about defeating 3 opponents in hand-to-hand combat. The cadets passed, their heavy footsteps fading down the corridor. Daniel returned to his mopping. He had learned early in his time at the academy that invisibility was a gift. When nobody looked at you, nobody asked questions. When nobody asked questions, nobody discovered things you wanted to keep hidden. Daniel finished the corridor and moved on to the next section. This part of the academy housed the tactical simulation chambers, large rooms filled with holographic projectors and neural interfaces that could create any battle scenario imaginable. During the day, cadets spent hours in these chambers, fighting simulated wars against simulated enemies. At night, Daniel cleaned them. He pushed open the door to the first chamber and stepped inside. The room was dark, the holographic projectors dormant. Without the simulations running, it was just a large, empty space with a grid pattern on the floor and walls. Daniel turned on the lights and began his work. As he cleaned, his mind wandered to the same places it always wandered, memories he tried to suppress but could never fully escape, faces that appeared in his dreams, voices that echoed in the quiet moments. He remembered a different time, a different version of himself, a younger man with fire in his eyes and purpose in his heart, a man who believed he could make a difference, who thought that courage and determination could overcome any obstacle. That man had learned hard lessons. Daniel shook his head, forcing the memories back into the dark corners of his mind. The past was the past. He had built a new life here, a small and quiet life that asked nothing of him except clean floors and polished surfaces. It was enough. It had to be enough. He finished the first simulation chamber and moved to the second, then the third, then the fourth. The work was repetitive, but Daniel found comfort in repetition. Each stroke of the mop was the same as the one before. No surprises, no complications, no consequences. By the time he finished the simulation chambers, the evening classes had ended. The corridors filled with cadets heading to the dining hall or their quarters. Daniel navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, his cart serving as both tool and shield. People moved around him without thinking, parting like water around a stone. He made his way to the maintenance quarters, a small section of the academy reserved for the staff who kept the massive facility running. Cleaners, technicians, food service workers. The invisible army that made it possible for the cadets and instructors to focus on their important work. Daniel's room was small but adequate. A bed, a desk, a small bathroom, a window that looked out at the academy grounds. He had few personal possessions, some clothes in the closet, a few books on the desk, a photograph in the drawer that he rarely looked at anymore. He showered and changed into clean clothes. His uniform went into the laundry bin to be washed overnight. Tomorrow he would put on a fresh uniform and do everything again. The same routine, day after day, week after week, year after year. Some people might have called it boring. Daniel called it peace. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep would come eventually, though it always brought dreams. He had learned to live with the dreams. They were the price he paid for the things he had done, the choices he had made. Some prices could never be fully paid, only managed. The next morning came too quickly. Daniel rose before dawn, as he always did. Old habits were hard to break, even habits that no longer served any purpose. He dressed, ate a simple breakfast in the staff cafeteria, and collected his cleaning cart from the supply room. His first task of the day was always the same: cleaning the administrative wing. This was where the academy's leadership worked, the senior instructors and administrators who ran the institution. The offices were large and well-appointed, filled with expensive furniture and important-looking documents. Daniel cleaned them all with the same careful attention he gave to every space. He had learned that consistency was important. Do your job well, every time, and people have no reason to pay attention to you. Make a mistake, and suddenly they start looking closer. He could not afford for anyone to look closer. The morning passed without incident. Daniel moved from the administrative wing to the academic buildings, cleaning lecture halls and study rooms. He nodded politely to the few people who acknowledged him and kept his eyes down when he passed groups of cadets. Around midday, he took his lunch break in a quiet corner of the staff cafeteria. The other workers chatted among themselves, sharing gossip about the academy and complaints about their supervisors. Daniel ate alone, as he always did. He was not unfriendly exactly, but he had learned that keeping distance from others was safer for everyone. After lunch, he moved to the dining hall. This was one of the larger spaces in the academy, capable of seating thousands of beings at once. It was also one of the messiest. Cadets from 37 species meant 37 different types of food, each with its own tendency to spill, splatter, or stain. Daniel worked methodically, moving between the long tables with his mop and cloth. A cadet had spilled some kind of protein paste near the north wall. A group of human cadets had left crumbs scattered across an entire section. The at least were relatively clean eaters, though they had a habit of leaving claw marks on the tables. As he cleaned, Daniel observed. It was an old habit, one he could not seem to break no matter how hard he tried. He watched the cadets without appearing to watch them, noting the way they grouped together, the dynamics of their relationships, the small tensions and alliances that formed the social fabric of the academy. Most of what he saw was predictable. Young beings learning to become soldiers, dealing with the pressures of competition and the challenges of training. Some would succeed, others would fail. A few would go on to do great things. Most would simply do their jobs, serving the fleet in whatever capacity they were assigned. Daniel had once believed that he would do great things. He had been wrong about the nature of greatness. His afternoon continued with the cleaning of the library. a vast space filled with data terminals and physical books from hundreds of worlds. The library was usually quiet, populated by serious students who preferred study to socializing. Daniel appreciated the atmosphere. It reminded him of a time when he had believed that knowledge was the answer to every problem. He had learned that some problems had no answers. As evening approached, Daniel made his way to his final task of the day, the Hall of Fallen Heroes. This was a long gallery lined with memorial plaques, each one dedicated to a being who had given their life in service to the Galactic Alliance. The plaques dated back over 1,000 years, chronicling conflicts that had shaped the galaxy. Daniel always saved this task for last. It was his private ritual, his way of honoring something that he could never speak about openly. He entered the hall and began his work, moving slowly from plaque to plaque. Some of the names were famous, celebrated in history books and taught in academy courses. Others were obscure, remembered only by family and friends who had long since passed themselves. Daniel read each name as he cleaned. He had read them all hundreds of times, but he never grew tired of the ritual. These beings deserved to be remembered. Their sacrifices deserved to be honored. He paused at certain plaques longer than others. 7 plaques, scattered throughout the hall, that held names he knew better than his own. Names that appeared in his dreams and whispered to him in moments of silence. The big man with the easy laugh who had always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments. Tors, the medic who could patch a wound while under fire and never stopped believing they would make it home. Park, the tech specialist who could hack any system and always had a bad joke ready for the worst moments. Cole, the strategist who saw patterns nobody else could see and planned operations that should have been impossible. The pilot who could fly anything and once guided a damaged shuttle through an asteroid field while half the controls were on fire. Rachel, the youngest of them, barely 20 years old, who had more courage than anyone Daniel had ever known. And Timothy Vance, the leader who had held them all together, who had believed in the mission when everyone else had lost hope. 7 names, 7 stars, 7 friends who had died while Daniel lived. He stood before Timothy's plaque the longest. The inscription was simple, just a name, a rank, and a date. It said nothing about the man Timothy had been, the sacrifices he had made, the impossible choices he had faced. It said nothing about the final mission, the one that had ended everything. Daniel's hand trembled slightly as he wiped the plaque clean. 23 years had passed since that day, but the wound was still fresh. Some wounds never healed. They just became part of you, a permanent ache that you learned to live with. He finished his cleaning and left the hall, pushing his cart back toward the maintenance quarters. The corridors were mostly empty now, the cadets in their rooms or attending evening activities. Daniel walked in silence, his footsteps echoing off the polished floors. He did not notice the golden eyes watching him from the shadows. Had been following the human janitor for 3 days. It had started as an assignment, a way to improve her failing grade in advanced human studies. Professor, I had told her to observe humans more carefully, to look beyond the surface and understand what made them different from other species. Had chosen the janitor because he was convenient. He worked in areas she passed every day, and he was unremarkable enough that watching him would not draw attention. She had expected to observe him for a few hours, note some basic behaviors, and write a simple report. Instead, she had found something that made no sense. The janitor was wrong. Not wrong in any way she could easily describe, but wrong in the way he moved, the way he watched his surroundings, the way he held himself even when he thought nobody was looking. Was a species of hunters. Her people had evolved on a world of dense forests and dangerous predators, and they had developed keen instincts for identifying threats. Those instincts were screaming at her now, telling her that the human janitor was not what he appeared to be. She had studied the way he walked, There was an economy to his movement, a precision that seemed out of place for someone doing such simple work. When he shifted his weight, it was always balanced, always centered over his feet. When he reached for his cleaning supplies, his hands moved with a smoothness that reminded her of the combat instructors. She had watched him stand still. Most beings fidgeted when they stood in one place, shifting weight, adjusting posture, making small unconscious movements. The janitor could stand perfectly motionless for long periods, a stillness so complete that it was almost unsettling. She had observed his eyes. They were always moving, always scanning, taking in information about his surroundings even when he appeared to be focused on his work. He positioned himself with his back to walls. He tracked movement in his peripheral vision. He noted exits and evaluated anyone who came near him. These were not the habits of a janitor. These were the habits of someone trained for something very different. Had decided to get closer, to see what else she might learn. And tonight, as the janitor walked through a quiet corridor near the maintenance wing, she had finally seen it. The tattoo. It was small, partially hidden by the collar of his uniform. But when he turned to check something behind him, the collar shifted, and she caught a clear glimpse of it. A black sword wrapped in chains, surrounded by 7 stars arranged in a precise pattern. Felt her scales flush cold with recognition. She knew that symbol. Every being in the galaxy who had studied the Terminus War knew that symbol. The 7 stars. His mind raced through everything she had learned about the most famous special operations unit in human history. The 7 stars had been formed during the darkest days of the Terminus War, when the Void Collective had seemed unstoppable. They had been a small team of humans who had done impossible things, infiltrating enemy strongholds, sabotaging key systems, assassinating machine intelligences. The details were mostly classified, but the stories were legendary. Single teams of humans holding off enemy forces for days. Missions that should have ended in certain death, somehow succeeding against all odds. Acts of courage and sacrifice that had helped turn the tide of the war. The 7 stars had been heroes. Most of them had died in the war, and the survivors had vanished into obscurity. Their identities were hidden by governments that feared what they represented, humans capable of things that made other species nervous. And now was looking at one of them, mopping floors at the Galactic Military Academy. She stayed in the shadows as the janitor passed, watching him move down the corridor with his cleaning cart. Her heart was pounding, her hunter's instincts telling her that she had found something important, something dangerous. She needed to learn more. Over the following days, increased her observation. She learned the janitor's schedule, his routines, the patterns of his daily life. She discovered that his name was Daniel Finch, that he had worked at the academy for 3 years, that he kept to himself and rarely spoke to anyone. She also noticed things that confirmed her suspicions. The scars on his arms and hands, visible when his sleeves rode up. The way he sometimes paused at certain memorial plaques in the Hall of Fallen Heroes. The occasional moments when his mask slipped, when his eyes showed something other than the empty expression of a servant. But she needed more information. She needed to understand who Daniel Finch really was and why he was hiding at the academy. She went to Professor The older professor had been teaching at the academy for over 40 years. Was in being, standing 4 feet tall with a segmented body covered in chitinous plates. 4 compound eyes gave the professor an unsettling appearance to most humanoid species, but had grown to appreciate A's wisdom and insight. She found the professor in a small office cluttered with data tablets and physical documents. Was grading papers, mandibles clicking softly as the professor read each submission. "Cadet," said without looking up, "I assume you have come about your observation assignment." "Yes, Professor, but I've discovered something unexpected." Now looked up, all 4 eyes focusing on with sudden interest. "Unexpected? In what way?" closed the door behind her, and sat in the chair across from the professor's desk. She took a deep breath, her scales rippling with nervous energy. "I've been observing a human janitor, as you suggested. His name is Daniel Finch. At first, I thought he was just an ordinary worker, but then I noticed things. The way he moves, the way he watches his surroundings, the habits he has that don't match his profession." I leaned forward. "Go on." "3 nights ago, I saw a tattoo on his neck, a black sword wrapped in chains with 7 stars around it." The professor went very still, had never seen us so motionless, not even during the most serious lectures. "You are certain of what you saw?" I asked, and there was something in the professor's voice that had never heard before, something that sounded almost like fear. Yes, the tattoo was clear. A black sword, chains, 7 stars, the symbol of the 7 stars unit from the Terminus War. Arose from behind the desk and moved to the window, looking out at the academy grounds. The professor's mandibles were clicking rapidly now, a sign of deep agitation. "I served in the Terminus War," I said quietly. "I was a young officer then, fresh from the academy, stationed on the defense line at Major. We held that line for 6 months, watching our fleet shrink day by day, waiting for the end that seemed inevitable." Listened in silence. She had not known about the professor's military service. The Void Collective was unlike any enemy we had faced before. Their ships were faster and more powerful than ours. Their tactics were flawless, predicted and countered every move we made. We threw everything we had at them, and it was never enough. I turned back to face. And then one night, a shuttle landed at our base. 4 humans stepped out, carrying weapons I had never seen before. They were calm, quiet, utterly unremarkable in appearance. But there was something in their eyes, something that made my instincts scream danger. "They were 7 stars," said. "Yes, though I did not know it at the time. They asked for our intelligence reports on the collective command node in our sector. I gave them everything we had, though I did not understand why it mattered. Our largest battleships could not breach the node's defenses. What could 4 humans possibly do?" The professor's mandibles clicked softly. 3 days later, the node went silent. The collective forces in our sector fell into chaos, their coordination shattered. We pushed them back, won our first real victory in months. I never learned exactly what those 4 humans did or how they did it, but I remember their eyes, the way they looked at the world. They had seen things that had burned the fear out of them. Thought about Daniel Finch, the quiet janitor who mopped floors and cleaned windows. She thought about his eyes, the emptiness that she now realized was something else entirely. "If this janitor is truly one of the 7 stars," I continued, "then he is one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, and also one of the most damaged. The things those soldiers did, the prices they paid, such things leave marks that never heal." "What should I do?" asked. "That depends on what you want to learn." I sat back down, regarding with all 4 eyes. "You came to me because you are failing advanced human studies. You do not understand humans, their psychology, their motivations, their capacity for behaviors that seem to defy logic." "Yes." "Then continue to observe this Daniel Finch. But carefully, cadet, very carefully. There are reasons why such men choose to disappear. If he perceives you as a threat, his response may be extreme." "You think he would hurt me?" I considered the question. "I think that men like him have survived by being prepared to do whatever is necessary. But I also think that he has chosen to hide rather than to act. He could be anywhere in the galaxy, doing anything. Instead, he mops floors at a military academy. That tells me something about who he is now, even if it does not tell me who he was." Nodded slowly. "I understand." "One more thing, cadet. Do not share what you have learned with anyone else. If the wrong people discover that a 7 stars veteran is hiding here, it could have consequences far beyond what you can imagine. Political consequences, military consequences. The the kind of consequences that can reshape the galaxy. Felt the weight of that warning settle on her shoulders. She had thought she was working on a simple class assignment. Now she realized she had stumbled into something much larger. "I will be careful," she promised. She left the professor's office with her mind churning. 1,000 questions filled her thoughts, questions about Daniel Finch and the Seven Stars and the war that had shaped the galaxy. She wanted answers, but she understood that finding them would require patience. So she continued to watch. Over the following weeks, refined her observation techniques. She learned to follow Daniel without being noticed, to position herself where she could see him without being seen. It was difficult. The human janitor had instincts that seemed almost supernatural, a constant awareness of his surroundings that made surveillance challenging. But was born to hunt. She adapted her approach, learning to predict Daniel's movements rather than follow them directly. She studied his patterns, his preferences, the subtle signs that indicated where he would be at any given time. And slowly, she began to understand. Daniel Finch was not simply hiding, he was punishing himself. Every aspect of his life at the academy was designed for isolation and self-denial. He lived in the smallest room available to staff members. He ate alone. He spoke to no one unless absolutely necessary. He worked long hours doing tasks that were far beneath his abilities. It was a form of penance realized, a way of atoning for something, though she did not yet understand what. She also noticed the pain that flickered across his face when he thought no one was watching, the way his hands sometimes trembled when he stood before certain memorial plaques, the haunted look in his eyes when he stared at nothing, lost in memories that he could not escape. The Seven Stars had been heroes, but Daniel Finch did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as something else entirely, something that required this quiet punishment. Found herself feeling something unexpected, sympathy. Whatever Daniel had done, whatever burden he carried, it was clearly destroying him from within. He was alive, but some part of him had died long ago. The man who mopped the floors was just a shell, going through the motions of existence without truly living. She wanted to help him. She was not sure why, or even if help was possible, but something about his suffering touched her in a way she could not explain. One evening, as was observing Daniel from a shadowed alcove, something unexpected happened. He saw her. She had been careful as she had ever been. But when Daniel turned from his work, his eyes went directly to her hiding place. There was no scanning, no searching. He simply looked at exactly where she was standing, as if he had known she was there all along. Their eyes met across the corridor. Felt her scales flush with embarrassment and something else, a primal recognition of danger. Daniel's expression did not change, but something in his gaze shifted, a calculation, an assessment of threat. Then, to her surprise, he looked away. He returned to his mopping as if nothing had happened, his movements as steady and unremarkable as always. Remained frozen in the shadows, her heart pounding. He had seen her. He knew she was watching him, and he had chosen to do nothing about it. Why? She thought about it all night, unable to sleep. He could have confronted her, demanded to know why she was following him. He could have reported her to the academy authorities, claimed that a cadet was harassing a staff member. He could have done 1,000 things. Instead, he had simply acknowledged her presence and let her go. It was, she realized, a message. He knew she was watching. He was allowing it. And that meant he was, in some strange way, in control of the situation. He was letting her observe him because he had decided it was acceptable. That realization changed everything. Had thought she was the hunter, tracking an unsuspecting prey. But Daniel Finch was no prey. He was something far more complex, a predator who had chosen to appear harmless, who was tolerating her observation for reasons she did not yet understand. The next day, decided to change her approach. Instead of hiding, she walked directly toward Daniel as he cleaned a corridor near the library. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral. "Can I help you, cadet?" "I think you know why I'm here," said, surprising herself with her boldness. Daniel's eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. "Do I? I've been watching you for weeks. You've known the entire time. I want to understand why you haven't done anything about it." Daniel set down his mop and regarded her with a steady gaze. Up close, she could see the lines on his face more clearly, the marks of age and something else. Suffering, perhaps, or exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. "You're the from Professor A's class," he said, "the one who's failing advanced human studies." Blinked, "How do you know that?" "I clean the professor's office. Papers get left on desks. Names and grades are not hard to see." His voice was flat, uninflected. "You're trying to understand humans. You thought watching me would help. I thought you were ordinary at first, but you're not." No, there was no defensiveness in his voice, no alarm. Just mild curiosity, as if she had commented on the weather. "You move like a fighter. You watch everything around you like you're expecting an attack. And you have a tattoo on your neck that I'm sure you didn't want anyone to see." For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes searched her face, looking for something. Then he nodded slowly. "You're observant, more observant than most. That's good for someone who wants to be an officer someday." "I want to understand," said. "Not just humans, who you are, why you're here. Some questions don't have answers that can be easily shared." "I'm willing to wait." Daniel picked up his mop again. "Then wait, I'm not going anywhere." He returned to his work and understood that the conversation was over, but something had shifted between them. An acknowledgement, a tentative connection. He had not who he was. He had not demanded that she stop watching. He had simply accepted her presence and her curiosity. It was a start. Over the following days, continued her observation, but she no longer hid. Instead, she would find opportunities to be near Daniel during his work, sometimes asking simple questions, sometimes just standing in comfortable silence. He tolerated her presence without complaint, occasionally offering brief comments or observations. She learned small things about him. He preferred to work in the early mornings and late evenings when the corridors were quiet. He was meticulous about his cleaning, treating every task with the same careful attention regardless of how mundane it seemed. He read books from the library during his breaks, philosophy and history mostly, subjects that seemed at odds with his humble profession. And she learned that he was kind in his own quiet way. When younger staff members struggled with difficult tasks, he helped without being asked. When cadets dropped things or made messes, he cleaned up without complaint or judgment. When the elderly a groundskeeper needed assistance, Daniel was there before anyone else. It was a strange kind of kindness, given without expectation of recognition or reward. The kindness of someone who had decided that small acts of service were the only contribution he was willing to make to the universe. One evening, as Daniel was cleaning the Hall of Fallen Heroes, joined him. She had been there before, watching from a distance, but this was the first time she had stood beside him as he worked. "You spend a lot of time in this hall," she observed. "It needs regular cleaning." His voice was carefully neutral. "That's not the only reason." Daniel did not respond immediately. He continued wiping down a memorial plaque, his movements slow and deliberate. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "Do you know what this hall represents?" Looked around at the hundreds of plaques lining the walls. A memorial for those who died in service to the Alliance. "Yes, but it's more than that. Each of these plaques represents a choice. Someone decided that something was worth dying for. They gave up everything, all the years they might have lived, all the experiences they might have had, for a cause they believed in." He moved to the next plaque, running his cloth over the inscribed name with something approaching reverence. "I come here to remember that choices have consequences, that the things we do matter, even when we can't see the outcome. Every name on these walls is a reminder that sacrifice is real and permanent and should never be forgotten. Watched his face as he spoke. For a moment the mask slipped and she saw the grief beneath, raw and ancient and utterly devastating. "You knew some of them," she said quietly. "The people on these walls, you knew them personally." Daniel's hand paused on the plaque. His eyes closed and he took a slow breath. "Yes, I knew them." He did not say more and did not push. But in that moment, she understood something important about Daniel Finch. He was not simply punishing himself. He was mourning. Every day in this hall, surrounded by the names of the dead, he was trying to process a grief so deep that it had consumed his entire life. The 7 stars had been more than a military unit to him. They had been family. And he was the only one left. Felt tears prick her eyes, an emotion she rarely experienced. She was a species that valued strength and control. But standing beside this broken human, watching him grieve for friends who had died 23 years ago, she could not help but be moved. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry for your loss." Daniel opened his eyes and looked at her. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain, though their experiences were very different. Then he nodded just slightly and returned to his work. They cleaned the rest of the hall in silence. That night went to her quarters and thought about everything she had learned. Daniel Finch was not just a former soldier. He was a survivor, carrying the weight of his fallen comrades with every step. His life at the academy, the isolation and the menial work and the daily visits to the memorial hall, it was all part of his way of honoring the dead. She understood now why he had not confronted her about her surveillance. He had seen her watching, had recognized her curiosity, and had decided that she was not a threat. Perhaps he had even welcomed the attention, in some small way. After so many years of invisibility, maybe there was a part of him that wanted someone to see who he really was. Made a decision. She would continue to observe Daniel, but not as a student studying a subject. She would observe him as someone who cared about who wanted to help if she could, who believed that even the most broken soul deserved compassion. She did not know if she could help him. She did not know if anyone could, but she was going to try. The autumn semester brought changes to the academy. New cadets arrived, instructors rotated through different courses, and the annual war games began their preparation phase. The war games were the highlight of the academic year, elaborate simulations that tested cadets in combat, strategy, and crisis management. His team had been working hard, drilling tactics, and refining their coordination. They were considered one of the stronger teams in the first-year cohort, and their instructor had hinted that they might be selected for the advanced scenarios. It was an honor that could define their careers. But even as she focused on her training, continued to think about Daniel Finch. She saw him in the corridors sometimes, pushing his cleaning cart, moving through the crowds of cadets without being noticed. She would catch his eye occasionally, and he would give her a small nod of acknowledgement before continuing on his way. They had not spoken since that evening in the Hall of Fallen Heroes, but something had changed between them. A connection, however fragile, had been formed. Felt that Daniel was aware of her in a way he was not aware of others, that she had somehow earned a place in his consciousness that went beyond simple recognition. She hoped that someday she would earn his trust as well. The weeks passed, and the war games drew closer. Threw herself into her preparation, spending long hours in the tactical simulation chambers, drilling scenarios until her reflexes were razor-sharp. Her team improved steadily, their coordination becoming almost instinctive. On the day before the war games began, found herself standing in the Hall of Fallen Heroes. She had come here more often recently, drawn by something she could not quite name. Perhaps it was a desire to understand Daniel better. Perhaps it was something else. She walked slowly along the walls, reading the names on the plaques. So many dead from so many different conflicts. Wars she had studied in class, battles that had shaped the galaxy. Each name represented a life, a story, a choice that had ended in sacrifice. She paused at one plaque near the center of the hall. The name was a human who had died 23 years ago. The inscription was simple like all the others, just a name, a rank, and a date. But knew that this was one of the plaques Daniel lingered at, one of his teammates, one of the 7 stars. She reached out and touched the cold surface of the plaque, trying to imagine the man it memorialized. Had he been brave, kind, funny, serious? What had he been like in the moments before his death? Had he been afraid? He would have liked you. Spun around. Daniel stood a few feet behind her, his cleaning cart beside him. She had not heard him approach. I mean, Daniel continued, his voice quiet. He always respected people who asked questions, who wanted to understand things, not just accept them. You startled me, said, her heart still pounding. Sorry, old habits. There was no apology in his voice, just a statement of fact. Why are you here? Turned back to the plaque. I'm not sure. I wanted to see, to understand. What it means to be remembered. She nodded. Daniel moved to stand beside her, looking at the plaque with an expression that was carefully neutral but not quite empty. Was the best of us in some ways. He was the one who always volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, not because he wanted glory or recognition, but because he believed that someone had to do the hard things, and he didn't want anyone else to bear that burden. He sounds brave. He was, but bravery wasn't what made him special. What made him special was that he cared about everyone, everything. He would risk his life to save a stranger without even thinking about it. That kind of caring, you can't teach it. You either have it or you don't. Looked at Daniel's profile, the lines of his face, the in his hair. You have it too, I've seen it. The way you help people even when they don't notice. Daniel's expression flickered. I'm just a janitor. No, you're not. Turned to face him fully. I don't know everything about your past, and I'm not asking you to tell me, but I know that you're more than what you pretend to be. And I know that whatever happened to you, whatever you're running from, it doesn't define who you are. For a long moment, Daniel said nothing. His eyes searched her face, looking for something. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he was struggling to contain. You should focus on your training, cadet. The war games start tomorrow. You have more important things to think about than an old man with too many ghosts. Maybe, said, but I'm choosing to think about you anyway. She walked past him and out of the hall, leaving Daniel alone with the names of the dead. The war games began the next morning. His team performed well in the preliminary rounds, defeating several opponents and earning a place in the advanced scenarios. Her teammates were energized, confident that they could go all the way to victory. But's mind kept wandering. She found herself thinking about Daniel, wondering what he was doing, whether he was watching the war games on the Academy's internal feeds. She wondered if he saw echoes of his own past in the simulated battles, memories of real combat that had been anything but simulated. The advanced scenarios were more challenging, featuring situations based on actual historical conflicts. His team faced a simulation of a space station defense, where they had to hold off an overwhelming enemy force while protecting civilian evacuees. It was brutal, unforgiving, and exactly the kind of scenario that separated good officers from great ones. They lasted longer than expected. Their coordination was strong, their tactics sound. But in the end, the simulated enemy was simply too numerous. They fell, one by one, until only was left, making a final stand at the evacuation point. When the simulation ended, her instructor congratulated them on their performance. Top 5 in the first-year cohort, an impressive showing, but barely heard the praise. She was thinking about something else. In the final moments of the simulation, when everything had seemed hopeless, she had kept fighting. Not because she thought she could win, but because giving up had felt wrong. Something inside her had refused to surrender, even when logic said there was no point. She understood, suddenly, what Daniel had meant when he talked about human persistence. That quality that allowed them to keep going when every rational calculation said they should stop. It was not just a human trait. It was something any being could cultivate if they had the right motivation. Wondered what Daniel's motivation had been in those dark days of the Terminus War. What had kept him fighting when his friends were dying around him and the enemy seemed unstoppable? What had driven him to do impossible things? She vowed to find out. The day after the war games sought out Daniel in the maintenance wing. She found him in the supply room, organizing cleaning equipment. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations on your performance," he said. "Top 5 is impressive." "You watched. The feeds are available to all staff. I like to see how the cadets are doing." He returned to his organizing. "Your tactics in the final scenario were solid. Good instincts. I thought about what you said, about choices having consequences, about the people on those memorial plaques." Daniel's hands paused, and "I think I understand now. A little bit anyway. When everything fell apart, when my team was dying and the enemy was closing in, I didn't want to give up. Not because I thought I could win, but because stopping felt like a betrayal. Like I would be letting down everyone who had sacrificed before me." Daniel turned to face her. His expression had changed, softened in a way she had not seen before. "That's the beginning of wisdom, cadet. Understanding that some things are worth fighting for even when you can't win. That the act of fighting itself has meaning, regardless of the outcome." "Is that what kept you going during the war?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. Daniel was silent for a long moment, his eyes distant. "During the war, I had my team. We kept each other going. We believed in the mission, believed that we could make a difference. And we did. We made a difference. But the price was higher than any of us imagined. The things we did, the choices we made, they saved billions of lives, but they cost us everything. Our innocence, our peace, our friends." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Our souls." Stepped closer. "I saw the memorial plaques you visit, 7 names, your team." Daniel closed his eyes. "The 7 stars, that's what they called us. Earth's greatest heroes, saviors of the galaxy, but we were just people. Scared, tired, ordinary people who did extraordinary things because we had no other choice." "What happened to them?" The question was perhaps too direct, too invasive, but needed to know. She needed to understand the wound that had marked this man so deeply. Daniel opened his eyes, and in them, she saw a pain so vast that it took her breath away. "We died. One by one, mission after mission, we died, until only I was left." "How?" "The final mission, the one that ended the war." He took a shaky breath. "We were sent to destroy the Void Collective's central processing hub, the heart of their entire network. If we could take it down, the war would be over." "But it was defended." "Yes, heavily defended. We knew going in that most of us wouldn't survive, but we believed it was worth it. We believed that our lives were a small price to pay for saving the galaxy." His hands clenched into fists at his sides. "We got inside. We set the charges. But then the collective realized what we were doing. They sent everything they had to stop us. My team, my friends, they held them off. They fought and died so that I could complete the mission." "You were the one who set off the charges." "Yes. I watched my friends die on the security monitors while I armed the explosives. I heard their last words over the comm. I saw them fall, one by one, until I was the only one left." Tears were flowing down his face now, but she did not look away. "I set off the charges and destroyed the hub. The war ended. Billions of lives were saved. And I've spent the last 23 years wishing I had died with my team." "That's not fair," whispered. "You completed the mission, you saved everyone, you're a hero." "I'm a coward. Daniel's voice was harsh, self-condemning. A hero would have found another way. A hero would have saved his friends and completed the mission. I made a choice. The mission or my team, and I chose the mission. You did what you had to do. Maybe, but that doesn't make it easier. Every day I wake up and remember their faces. Every night I dream about the things I could have done differently. I've been running from that guilt for over 2 decades, and it's never gotten any lighter. Reached out and took his hand. The gesture surprised both of them, but she did not pull away. You're not a coward. Cowards don't spend their lives honoring the dead. Cowards don't help people without expecting anything in return. Cowards don't carry the weight you carry and keep going day after day. Daniel looked at her hand in his, then at her face. Something in his expression shifted, like ice beginning to melt. You're kind, kinder than you know. I'm just telling the truth. They stood there for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding. Then Daniel gently his hand. You should go, cadet. You have classes to attend, a future to build. What about your future? I gave up on that a long time ago. But there was something in his voice, a small flicker of uncertainty that had not been there before. Stepped toward the door, then paused and looked back. I don't think you have. I think there's still hope for you, Daniel Finch, and I'm not going to stop believing that no matter what you say. She left before he could respond, but she thought she saw something in his eyes. Something that might have been hope, struggling to survive after so many years in darkness. That evening went to Professor A's office. The old listened as she recounted her conversation with Daniel, the story he had told, the pain she had seen in his eyes. When she finished, A was silent for a long moment. You have learned something important, cadet, something that most beings never understand. What's that? That heroism and suffering are not opposites. They are often the same thing. The greatest heroes are often the ones who pay the highest prices, who carry the heaviest burdens, who sacrifice the most for the sake of others. Nodded slowly. He thinks he's a failure, but he's not. No, he is not. Daniel Finch is one of the bravest humans I have ever heard of, not because he completed his mission, but because he has continued to live in spite of the pain it caused him. That kind of courage is rare. What can I do for him? A considered the question. Be present, be patient, be kind. Some wounds take a long time to heal, but with the right support, even the deepest scars can fade. Left the professor's office with a new sense of purpose. She had come to the academy to become an officer, to serve the Alliance, to make a difference in the galaxy. But now she had a different mission, a personal one. She was going to help Daniel Finch find his way back to life. She did not know how long it would take or whether she would succeed, but she was going to try, because that was what heroes did. They kept fighting, even when the odds seemed impossible. And Daniel Finch had taught her that.